watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
This was 2 years ago, the AJPA's annual meeting, and I was requested to speak on a panel that discussed the question of, and I don't remember the exact way it was phrased, but what should we report about Israel? How sincere should we be, or something like that? And the clear implication to me as a journalist was flipping it around or looking at the empty half of this glass is what amount of self-censorship should we impose on ourselves, when we report about Israel, which to me seemed to be a bit odd, that a bunch of journalists would be discussing self-censorship. What is appropriate in terms of us as Jewish reporters reporting about Israel? So I came in with kind of a lecture. Which said there shouldn't be any censorship. The same kind of restrictions that any journalist imposes on himself on herself when they report about anything. Jewish reporters should impose on themselves when they report about Israel, which is truth, honesty, professionalism, and so on and so forth. What I resented the most, and what I talked about the most, and if you want we can explore it a little bit further, was the question of whether Jewish reporters should be a part of the Israeli Hasbara effort, the Israeli, if you want to call it propaganda, or there's a kind of a nice word in Hebrew, which is Hasbara, which means explanation, how you explain yourself to others. And my answer was a resounding no, they should not.
The Israel Project is in the business of trying to get reporters the facts they need to get the Israel story right, and we do it for three reasons. It's not just because we're in the journalism business, because we're not a journalist business. We're a nonprofit educational organization that does this because we believe that facts will help lead to more support of Israel, and that a strong U.S.-Israel relationship is good for Israel's security, and because there are direct correlations between anti-Zionism that is caused by negative images of Israel in the media and anti-Semitism, big attacks in Jews in France after bad press coverage of major events, and of course the Jewish identity element. So when there is a bad story, we have to take a look at it, and we have to admit that there's a bad story, because you don't build a relationship with journalists based on bullshit. You have to build your relationship on facts. So you can put context around those facts. But when the president of Israel was accused of rape, and I feel very strongly about this issue, the Israel Project put out information about that the president of Israel was accused of rape. And when there are issues about settlements, we don't pretend that there aren't some differences on these issues. But what we do is we try and put them out in a factual way without adjectives, and we do believe that on the whole, when people see the facts, that they'll be more supportive of Israel. And the American public, as they are seeing more and more facts in the media now, are much more supportive of Israel than they are. But I don't think that it's possible to build any sort of relationship with a serious journalist by pretending that Israel is perfect. Because Israel, like America, like any democracy, makes mistakes. And this country that is 61 years old makes some pretty big ones sometimes. And if you're going to have any sort of serious relationship with the press and the public, you have to be honest with them. And that is really the entire basis of the relationship.
what they do is kind of retroactive censorship. In other words, they read the copy, and if there's anything there that they think is to be censored, they go back and there's some kind of a sanction that's applied. And the point of the story now is that I asked them, so what are your criteria? Israel's criteria were mainly security, anything that harms Israeli security, that has incitement in it, and things like that. And he said the main issue is image. What kind of image? So I said, what does that mean? Give me an example of something some kind of sanction that you took recently. And he said, well, one of the Palestinian newspapers ran a photo showing Palestinians in Gaza scrubbing a donkey on the beach. And we took some kind of a sanction against this newspaper. And I said, why? He said, well, it paints us in a negative light as primitives who go on the beach and scrub donkeys. The point is that there's a word in Arabic for it, which is aib, which means in Yiddish shande. It's shameful. And a lot of the self-censorship that I saw and that I saw discussed among my colleagues when I was working for the Forward, the Jewish reporters, was issues of shande, of what paints Israel in a really negative light. And that's something that's what I resented. I resented this notion that we are here to sugarcoat. I think that that's bad. I think that if there's anything that the Jewish media should be doing, is the total opposite, is to put it all out there, to show things as they are, to not be a part of a sugarcoating operation, but to tell people things as they are, particularly now when the mainstream media has downscaled so much its coverage of Israel.
Okay, I'm gonna skip to Joe and then come back to James, because I want Joe to answer that. You talked in Swampland the other day about your frustrations with the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and you said that maybe the United States, and Tom Friedman, interestingly, also wrote a similar column, saying that maybe the United States should pull back and not threaten to withdraw assistance, but to suspend assistance for a while until the sides got their act together. It's kind of a third rail here in Washington to talk about that. Jennifer talks about making it comfortable to criticize Israel as long as the context is there. I mean, do you feel that comfort here?
Well, first of all, thanks. Good morning, everybody. And let me just say the most important part of my biography with regard to this panel you didn't talk about, which is that I've been going to Israel for longer than Jamie's been on this earth. In fact, this year is the 30th anniversary of my first trip there. In fact, it's the 30th anniversary of the first time that I was mortared by Palestinians. Over those years, and it also means that my experience with Israel antedates the existence of Hezbollah, which did not exist in 1979. And if you want to talk about mistakes that Israel has made, the incursion into Lebanon, going to Beirut, being supportive of massacres of human beings, which in turn helped, along with the birth of Iran, helped create Hezbollah, would have to rank as a very high one. Since then, I've covered a lot of elections and a lot of wars, and I've been to all of Israel's neighbors. I was in Iran for the elections in June. So I've come to know the region pretty well, and I've come to know Israel pretty well. And I always love going. And I feel a great affinity as a Jew and as a human being for Israel. But I also have come to the conclusion that unless there is a two-state deal, Israel may not exist 100 years from now. It's not an exceptional point of view. 3 of the last 4 Israeli prime ministers pretty much agreed with me that a deal was necessary. Unfortunately, Yasser Arafat didn't agree with it when he was presented with the deal. which is, testimony to Abba Eban's famous phrase that the Palestinians never lose an opportunity to lose an opportunity. But at this point, and over the years, it also has, it's also become fairly plain to me that in terms of Israel's relations with the rest of the world and Israel's instability in Israel's future, that the Likud party has been a disaster. The Likud party, which brought Israel into Beirut in 1982, and right now is refusing to acknowledge the fact that if there is to be peace in the region, Jerusalem has to be the capital of Israel, and Jerusalem has to be the capital of Palestine. And as long as this Israeli government insists on building settlements in its opponent's capital, there will be no peace, there will be no negotiations, there will be no agreement. And I think that it's in the United States' best interests to let the Israelis know that we disagree with this policy strenuously.
Thank you. Okay. Jamie, you just heard a criticism of the Israeli government, and it's going to happen. There's going to be criticism of the Israeli governments. They're vulnerable. They're human, just like the rest of us. They're elected, and then they're thrown out of office because they made mistakes. In terms of your commentary, your own visits to Israel, do you keep in mind when you're reading critical commentary of Israel what's legitimate, what's not legitimate, and how do you make those distinctions?
I think it's very simple. I thought what Joe said, I disagree with a lot of it, but it was perfectly, acceptable criticism. And I think one of the greatest lies of this whole Israel debate is the claim that you hear by so many people that you can't criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite, which is so annoying, because I've never heard anyone legitimately criticize Israel and be called an anti-Semite for it. I've heard anti-Semites, well, it depends on what you said and depends on who said it. Unless, I mean by a mainstream, credible person. By a credible person, who called you an anti-Semite?
Abe Foxman.
He did not call you an anti-Semite. And Joe, let's go back to that. You said, Joe, what you wrote, let's get into.
Okay, we'll get back to that in a second.
Joe, you can respond. Joe, you wrote that the Iraq War was because of neocons plumping for war for Israel, and you said that it raised the question of dual loyalties. That's what you wrote. Now, then what did you write? Go ahead.
Okay.
It's just crap. I mean, what?
I told you, Stefan, bigger room. Let Joe respond.
Look, the fact is that about a month before the Iraq War, I did a column about Israel and as the casus belli that dare not speak its name. There are people who are at this conference who told me off the record before that war that taking out Saddam Hussein would be good for Israel and that it would start a benign domino effect in the region. I never said it was the primary casus belli. The primary casus belli was that you had ignorant nationalists in charge of the United States government who felt that they had to whack some Arab country without knowing anything about it. That was the primary casus belli. But the fact is that there were American leaders of the American Jewish community who were, including Joe Lieberman, who were pushing for this war, which I thought and think has done grave damage to the United States.
Can I respond to that? Do you know that Joe Lieberman might not, maybe he had legitimate reasons for supporting the war in Iraq. Maybe he believed it was in America's national security interest, as you did at the time, and as did 70% of the American people, both houses of Congress, and the President of the United States. I think it's really irresponsible to accuse Jews, I think it's very irresponsible to accuse Jews, especially in the government, of dual loyalties. You're accusing them of treason, and that is inappropriate, and that's beyond the line.
I didn't accuse any Jew in the government of dual loyalties.
You said it raised the question of dual loyalties, which is a very cowardly way of saying that they had dual loyalties. Putting it in the passive voice, Joe, does not absolve you.
Let Joe complete his thought.
Could I just say that that for those of you who don't believe that these feelings exist in the Jewish community, you are deluding yourselves. They do exist. And at the time, first of all, Jamie, if you could find one sentence that I wrote in support of the war, please tell me where it is. At one point, in an interview with Tim Russert, thinking aloud, and when it was apparent that we were about to go in, I said, well, you know, if we gotta, you know, maybe. But before and after, I'm on the record continuously as in opposition to this war. And what you have done, and what Pete Wehner, your colleague at the Commentary blog, has done, and what Glenn Greenwald on the left has done, is the essence of propaganda. Now, the fact is, I'm glad you graduated from college 3 years ago, but maybe you should go out and actually do some reporting.
Jamie's a solid reporter. We don't.
I think the story of the Jewish year in terms of the Jewish press that's underreported, and I think it might be self-censorship, is what I see as the impending collapse of Hadassah. And this might be controversial, but I'm just going to put it on the table. I am shocked that there is not more coverage of the disgrace of what has happened with the Hadassah leadership. And I say that as a life member of Hadassah that cares very deeply about the mission of Hadassah, and I've reached out to their president and offered to try and help them. But here's what happened. Bernie Madoff, what a shanda. The JTA has done a phenomenal job in covering the Bernie Madoff affair, which I think is phenomenal, and the credit to the Jewish community that really distanced themselves from what you see at Yeshiva, how they handled this affair, I think is terrific. And when you look at, you know, what ADL puts out about anti-Semitism is actually down after the Bernie Madoff affair, it shows that if you handle a shanda in an appropriate way, you still can handle it appropriately and not cause anti-Semitism. But here's what happened with Hadassah. Their CFO had an affair with Bernie Madoff and invested tens of millions of dollars with Bernie Madoff. Why we are not covering the fact that everyone who signed off on that transaction should be fired or should be held in directly accountable is, to me, shocking. The fact that the JTA has a wonderful blog, and somebody handed out something about this Funder piece. I read it constantly. It had a little entry on how Jewish organizations did with their fundraising this year. And here's what I thought was so amazing in what was reported in JTA, which is that over $80 million a year had been raised by Hadassah. This year, $40 million. So Hadassah is now, a Zionist organization designed to help Israel that runs phenomenal youth villages, phenomenal Zionist youth movements, is selling its camps to pay for its hospital. When did it become a hospital organization as opposed to a Zionist organization? So I think we need to be very open in how we cover things, and if you look at this GA, where you see a new CEO of the United Jewish Communities with its brand new name, and new sheriff in town who's doing a much better job, part of it, I think, is because the Jewish press, to your credit at the JTA, the Forward, and other publications said, you know what? There's a problem at UJC. The problem needs to be fixed. To see Kathy Manning and Michael Gelman and other people figure out how to do a listening tour and to figure out what needs to be changed to see their new, young, listening mode exec make a difference, I think is going to be a really big asset for the Jewish community. And I think a lot of credit goes to JTA and the other Jewish publications for shining a light on that.
You know, to get back to the stated topic of this panel, the Israel lobby and journalism, can I just say that I have never been pressured or approached or propagandized by the Israel lobby. You know, it's more likely the sort of information that Jennifer's organization gives, which is uniformly excellent. And furthermore, I do believe that You know, if the Irish can have a lobby and the Chinese can have a lobby and the Indians are getting really huge as a lobbying force on Capitol Hill, now Israel can have a lobby too. The crap I've gotten has mostly come from neoconservative propagandists who have, over the last decade, spent an awful lot of time bullying people who do not agree with their very extreme position. To go back just for a moment to the previous debate, it wasn't Iraq that I was concerned about when I wrote that. It was Iran. There were, you know, on the commentary blog, in the McCain campaign especially, there were an awful lot of people who were plumping for war with Iran, which I thought, in fact, I agree with the United States military, I agree with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, would be a tremendous disaster for our country. I also happen to think that it would be a disaster for Israel. But there is a group of people, and you've seen them operate in recent months. The propaganda war that they waged against J Street was an example of this. The bullying. I mean, I don't have a rooting interest between AIPAC and J Street, but I do believe the kind of sliming and bullying that's done on a continuing basis by these people, number one, not only could get Americans killed, number two, can do long-term damage to Israel, but number three, it's inaccurate, and it's propaganda, and that's where the pressure is now.
I mean, bullying is a real extreme word, and
Is it?
well, I mean, I know, Joe, it takes an uncommon valor to wake up every morning and criticize the neocons, and knowing that someone on the commentary blog or Abe Foxman might write something negative about you. It's really tough. I know, it's very hard. You're a very brave man for going after the neocons. I mean, but come on, seriously. I mean, bullying. Who's being bullied here? I mean, you, in particular, you accused Jewish neoconservatives, is what you said, of plumping for war with Iran. So Jewish neocons surrounding John McCain and his vessel, Sarah Palin, and polluting their minds. Okay, I think that's, you didn't name any names. You didn't say anyone. You just sort of threw this out. You threw this out there into the debate, and I think that's irresponsible. You say that J Street.
If I had been named or the others had been named, it would have been better. I mean, we know that Douglas Feith and others did this stuff.
Do we?
Yes.
What? That Doug Feith has dual loyalties? Is that what you're accusing him of?
No. One for war in Iraq.
So did Don Rumsfeld.
Right.
So did Dick Cheney. To my knowledge, they're Gentiles. Okay. So why is it the Jewish neoconservatives who are singled out? That's what I want to know.
They were singled out. Why are they extremists? Why are they extremists?
Answer both questions, and then I'm going to move back to
Because
work.
what we're talking about here is the most serious thing you can talk about. We are talking about issues of war and peace. We are talking about our children in hospitals throughout this country who don't have limbs, whose brains have been shattered. I go to these hospitals. I've spent time downrange with the U.S. military in combat. You don't go into these things lightly. John McCain's position on Iran and the people who surrounded him, like Michael Goldfarb, was disgraceful. It was just flat out disgraceful. And the fact that the people who seemed to be pushing hardest for this were American Likudniks who thought that an invasion of Iran would make Israel more secure. I mean, you know, that's arguable. But it isn't arguable that an invasion of Iran has anything to do with America's national self-interest or national security. It's a second-level, third-level threat at best.
Okay, I'm going to let
Joe, wait, one second.
respond.
John McCain spent 5 years in a North Vietnamese prison camp. I don't think he needs lectures from you on the horrors of war. Okay?
John McCain fought from the sky, And he was, he fought, he was, John, I've known
Okay,
I've known John McCain
I want Joe to complete his thought. I'm going to ask Ori a question, Jennifer a question, then we're going to go to the audience, okay?
I've known John McCain for 20 years. And no one can gainsay the sacrifices he made for the country. But John McCain, by his own confession, in conversation with me, had no experience with the kind of warfare that is being fought on the ground now in Iraq or Afghanistan, or for that matter, in Vietnam. That's all I was trying to say, Jamie, and please, please, don't try and distort this as you've tried to distort other things that I say.
Okay, I'd like Ori to step in. He has a point to make about bullying.
There is a phenomenon that I think is very important to point out, which I deeply resent, and I know for a fact, because I've spoken with a lot of journalists, mainly in the mainstream media, resent tremendously, which I call the camera phenomenon. I'm talking about an organization called Camera, but it's not just that. There are many other groups, many other organizations that deal with bullying the media, that like to deal, the media is sexy, it's fun, it's interesting, and people tend to think that if only they could influence the media so that they present Israel's image in a more positive way, everything will be resolved and everything will be fine and so on. Some groups, and not only Camera, make it a sport to go after reporters and badger them. And that not only...
On both sides of the conflict, too. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, right. And not only does that do damage to the truth many times, but it also does damage to the way in which reporters approach this issue. So if we talk about pressure being put on journalists, I know that there are reporters who have become vengeful as a result of that kind of pressure. That's one piece of my resentment of this kind of phenomenon. The other is the diversion, is that it diverts people from focusing on what I think is the most important thing, and that is the facts. That is issues of policy and issues of what actually happens on the ground.
Many reporters covering Israel have never been to Israel. We have reporters on our list, and we sent a survey asking them, what do you need for us in terms of services? 62% of the reporters who somehow cover the Israel story, they might be the headline writer, they might write the photo caption, they might be the talk show host like Sean Hannity, they've never been to Israel. 62% of the reporters who somehow cover Israel have never been there, and therefore we at the Israel Project thinks it's that our motto is pitch, don't bitch. Get the reporters the facts they need, let them write this story. Is there another side that sends out their version of the facts? Of course. Many Palestinian or Iranian or Hezbollah, Hamas, they all have PR folks that are putting out content. But you got to give the content to the reporter. We have a reporter that we work with very closely, and his beat is traffic, crime, Israel. He's never been to Israel. His editors
there's a lot of traffic there.
His editors gave it to him,
and it's criminal,
because there's a lot of Jews in their community, and the Jews want to hear about what's going on, but he's never been, and they can't afford to send him. Traffic, crime, Israel, when there's a big pileup on the highway, I said, what's in common? They said they all bleed. They all bleed.
Right.
And if it bleeds, it bleeds.
Could I just augment that?
Sure.
You know, what Jennifer says is absolutely true, and if it's true for Israel, it is 10 times more true, 20 times more true for the Arab countries in the region and other non-Arab countries like Iran in the region.
We don't rate or endorse media outlets one way or another. And so what I can tell you is that the media has really changed. At one point, people watched Walter Cronkite, and everyone from left to right was watching Walter Cronkite. But now we have a new economic reality where media outlets are trying to stay alive. And part of their trying to stay alive is that they're putting themselves in different ideological camps so that they have their customers that they're serving. So that Fox is serving predominantly Republicans, more conservative. And in fact, we have a question that we ask in our polls: what is your worldview? There are two worldviews. Worldview A is that basically all people are good, and if there's more communication, they can all get along. Worldview B is that there are good people and bad people, and the good people need to be protected from the bad people. The country breaks down, interestingly, 46-46. Very little swing. Almost everyone who voted for John McCain believes that good people need to be protected from bad people, and almost everybody who voted for Obama thinks that with more communication and education, we can all get along. Everyone who watches, not everyone who watches, but most of the people who watch Fox are worldview B, good people versus bad people. The people who listen to NPR believe that with more education and information, we can all get along. The polling views in terms of support of Israel, and I handed out a poll, this is a fairly lengthy answer, I apologize, but we see 60% of Americans say that if they have to choose who should America support, America or Israel, a lot more Republicans will say they're supportive because Democrats will say, I'm not going to take sides. Democrats will say, we just need a little more communication. We're going to, have Ahmadinejad and Bibi sit in a room, and Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil are going to come in, and we're just going to educate each other until we can figure this out. And and there is a different worldview, and I think NPR knows who their customers are, and that is people on the left who believe that we can all get along. And so there is a different content, and that's not different than, say, MSNBC, which is definitely got an audience on the left that is trying to communicate with and really be in touch with.
Was there a third option there, Jennifer?
For which?
Third option. I mean, these are the hazards of polling. This is why. No, this is the hazard of polling. Because I would venture to say that the vast majority of people on both sides of that issue would say that you need a little bit of both. Right? There's certainly a need for greater understanding and communication, but there's also a need for using predator missiles to whack the leadership of al-Qaeda, and there's also a need for the Israelis, and I would hope in the future, if we move to containment and deterrence against Iran, the United States, to block shipments of arms to Hezbollah. I mean, I think that the problem, a great problem with the media, not just about Israel, but in general, is that we tend to overestimate the power and the reality of numbers.
Is there really service in going out there and plucking with tweezers small factual mistakes that people make? Akiva Eldar, my other colleague, former colleague from Haaretz, wrote an article the other day saying that Israel has given a handful of building permits in Area C in the West Bank. Camera went out there and found out that they've given around 100 out of 1,100 requests. Who cares? Nobody cares about these small, factual, I don't know if it's even a mistake or an error. It doesn't matter. What matters is what's going on out there. What matters is the truth. What matters is the policy. What matters is the standstill that we see on the ground of an occupation that is becoming a fact of life, that is becoming more and more difficult to reverse. We are really approaching fast a point of no return with this occupation, and what we're seeing is Israel becoming more and more isolated internationally as a result of that. Last night, a meeting between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States, where the President did not allow a photographer. There was no press briefing after that. The Prime Minister of Israel came in like a thief in the night and left like a thief in the night. That is a part of something that's happening to even U.S.-Israeli relationship, and I'm not talking now about Israeli-European relationship or other relationships that Israel has with the world. There's a serious problem, and people have to report about it. And when you have people who, as far as I see it, are journalistic heroes like Gidon Levy, who go out there and report things at a risk to their lives, by the way, I think that should be lauded and not criticized.
Young lady.
For us college students, especially conservative students on campus, we are bullied, we are pressured.
Absolutely.
We are told that we are hateful, we are told apartheid. There's a young lady in this audience who was removed from her newspaper for writing a factually based pro-Israel article, and I'm wondering if by saying that neoconservatives are bullying, maybe you're kind of, in the best way possible, not...
Look, I understand what you're asking. This is, you should see what the left-wing blogs write about me. You should see the hateful crap that comes out of the left-wing blogs about me. If there's something has happened here, and in journalism, and let me give you an example from something that we all just witnessed a little while ago. I said that John McCain fought from the air as the beginning of a statement. Jamie then interrupted me, and everybody in the audience groaned. Oh, he's not saying that John McCain was an American hero. My full statement was this: John McCain fought from the air. No one would gainsay his service as an American hero. No one would question the torture and degradation he underwent for 5 years in a North Vietnamese prison. But his experience of war was different from those like Colin Powell and all the others who fought on the ground in Vietnam and have fought on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. He doesn't have firsthand experience of what that's like. He also doesn't... Wait a second. He's interrupting again. So
Jamie, I think you're amazing, but can I hear him?
So Jamie, I'll come to your point in a minute. My point is this, that if Glenn Greenwald, the left-wing blogger, or Michael Goldfarb, the neoconservative blogger, are sitting in the audience, they're going to report this story the same way. It's going to be Joe Klein questions McCain's war service. They're only going to report John McCain fought from the air. Jamie would do the same thing because you saw how he interrupted me. Now, where I get the credentials to write about counterinsurgency is this. In 2005, David Petraeus invited me out to Fort Leavenworth to spend a week learning about counterinsurgency. I did. I have devoted hours and hours and weeks and months. I have gone out into the field to see it practiced in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I would say that if I don't have credibility to do that as a journalist, then journalism doesn't mean anything. How much time have you spent on the ground with the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Jamie reply.
Joe, no one's disputing your credentials, which you've repeated for us many, many times. The point is your attribution of views to John McCain. You're saying he doesn't have these views on his own accord. He doesn't really believe in these things. You're saying... Yes, you are. You're saying he's surrounded... Can I finish? Can I? You said he's surrounded by Jewish neoconservatives who are putting these ideas in his head, and because he didn't really fight in Vietnam, he doesn't really know the horrors of war, and that's how he's able to have this bellicose foreign policy. Maybe, look, Joe, I respect your views. You can oppose the Iraq War. You can oppose an attack on Iran. All I ask, very simply, is don't call the people who disagree with you traitors. Why is it so hard?
Did you just listen to this shit? It's simply unbelievable because, first of all...
Let's wrap it up after this.
First of all, I attribute John McCain's views to John McCain. He and I have a great difference of opinion on this. And I will say this, that John McCain's views changed over time as he surrounded himself with neoconservative advisors. Other people who have known and loved John McCain for a long time, people like Chuck Hagel, people who are, oh, Chuck Hagel, he's sneering. oh, you really have a right to sneer at Chuck Hagel, who was,
Let's
let's
move on.
What you've done is completely distort what I said. What I'm saying to you is this, that that not only is there bullying on both sides, but too much of our media conversation now has become a form of bullying. And so people like me in the middle who try and convey complex ideas get hammered from both sides.
Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for coming.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.